Welcome back to Hope for the Grieving, the virtual healing experience showing you how to ease your heartache and move through grief to create a beautiful life after loss. I'm your host, Erin Patten. I'm so grateful your path has led you here, and I truly cannot wait to see where this journey leads you. Let's meet today's guest. I'm so happy to have our next guest, Blake, here with me today to speak on the topic of substance abuse, addiction, and mental health, which, very much like grief, are things that society does not know how to handle or talk about. Blake Cohen is a certified addictions professional through the Florida Certification Board. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Florida Atlantic University and his master's degree in leadership from Nova Southeastern University. Fueled by passion, education, and his professional, personal, and family experiences with mental health concerns and substance use disorders, Blake aims to assist those that have been directly or indirectly affected towards a path of understanding, empowerment, and healing as the co-founder of Next Level Recovery Associates. He is also the best-selling author of the book, I Love You More, Short Stories of Addiction, Recovery, and Loss from the Family's Perspective. Blake, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here too. This is such an important topic to discuss, and obviously has become my life passion, talking about substance use disorders and helping families move through that process the best that we can.
Absolutely. I love the work that you're doing. This topic is very close to my heart, having lost Greg to his addiction and just struggling to navigate that with him and our relationship for many years prior. This may actually be one of the toughest interviews for me emotionally through the series. I'm already feeling kind of nervous, but I know it's important and it's going to be a very enlightening conversation for so many watching. Definitely much needed. So thank you.
I will warn you that I'm a when people see somebody throw up, they throw up. It's the same for me for crying.
Yeah.
For crying, like if you start, I might start. So I just warning everybody who's watching and listening.
Totally fine. I'd love for you to just start off by sharing a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today, doing all of the amazing work that you're doing.
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief the best I can. I think it's for me, I kind of like to start to say that I'm very grateful to have just celebrated 10 years of sobriety on a New Year's Eve. And the picture of what that day was like for me compared to what it was like 10 years prior, it was like one of the most beautiful emotional days that I've had.
Oh,
My wife, who has been with me since she was with me through it all, planned a surprise party for me. And I walked into a restaurant and it was all of my family, people who told me they wanted nothing to do with me anymore throughout my addiction, who set their own boundaries, which I'm so proud of them for, but they're in my life. All of my friends who've been with me since kindergarten, some of them.
Oh my gosh.
Guys from the rooms of the 12-step support groups that I go to, work people. It was just everybody I love in this room celebrating this milestone with me. And it's hard to imagine that if I go 10 years back, because I know what it felt like first walking into that treatment center 10 years ago and feeling so alone and so unlovable. And I think a lot of this goes back to childhood, and without going too far and diving into a lot of that stuff, addiction runs in the family, which also means that trauma runs in the family. And we experienced it generation through generation, one after the next. And I've had siblings who struggled, and many people around me have struggled with it. And one of the things that never happened as a child, as I watched certain things unfold within my family, was a conversation about it. No one talked about it. And the only thing I ever heard was basically that those people who were doing these things in our family are bad or rotten or idiots or morons or, losers, lowlife. And that was like the only thing I ever heard people describe someone who struggles with an addiction problem. So as I go through high school and start recognizing that I feel like I don't belong anywhere and don't feel comfortable within my own skin, which may relate to some of the trauma experienced through growing up, I found substances, and it starts off with alcohol and marijuana. And I just found a sense of peace in substances when I started using them. And I couldn't explain it. Both times that I used those two substances, the first time I had a horrible night. Things went very wrong for me. Yet I still woke up the next day being like, wow, that was the first relief I've had in a very long time.
Mm.
And it just sort of developed from there. And while I was using is during the time that everybody talked about like the pain pill epidemic was going on, which unfortunately has now turned into the fentanyl and opioid crisis that we're experiencing now.
Yeah.
But there was pill mills on every corner, and there was so much oxycodone and oxycontin around, and it seemed like everybody was doing it. And in my house, there was, for legitimate reasons for a parent, but in my house it existed.
Mm.
And a friend told me that you can take it and it'll make you feel good. And it was really my first exposure, besides a couple surgeries, first exposure to like the strength of these and the euphoria that it caused. And I think it's important to say that I come also from a family that's affected by addiction, but also the family is the family that none of this is supposed to happen to. It's, if you look from the outside, it's like the perfect family. They have money. We're in a small, nice little town. We're sheltered. We went to private schools. All of these things where like no one imagines um, people like us get affected. Yet that's
Mhm.
honestly the majority of people who are being affected by this.
So
And
true.
and unfortunately, people like our family, there's even more shame and guilt that circumvent the system. And it's really difficult to get out of it because it's so difficult to ask for help. And it's just skipping forward, as I got introduced to these pain meds, I found people who can give them to me, and my addiction turned into a full-blown addiction where I was unable to stop using. And the path that I was on was pretty quickly deterred. And um, you know, I had some brushes with overdose. I had some, I was arrested. I had to go to treatment a few times. And every time just really sort of added more and more to the shame. And, I feel fortunate to say that I'm in recovery. And I think when we were young, there was like this saying that parents would say all the time, like, don't use that because you never know what's in there.
Mm.
And now it's the reality of our situation, and we've
Yeah.
lost so many. There's a guy I know who's also in recovery for about like 40 years now, and he calls everybody who's in recovery a brother and sister, whether
Mhm.
they're in recovery or not. If they're struggling with this disease, they call them a brother and sister. So I feel like this has become a reality that everything is so dangerous these days to use, and we've
Mhm.
lost a lot of brothers and sisters in to this disease. And I've watched it develop over the last 10 years. So that personal part of my life and the familial issues that we dealt with early on, and always loving having an interest in how the mind works, it gave me the empathy that I feel like I needed to put myself in other people's shoes, and gave me the motivation to say, like, I really want to explore a profession in this industry and to see if there's a difference that I can make in this industry. And it started as a director of admissions for a program, or started actually even lower than that as a tech, and has moved now to seeking higher education, trying to figure out new ways to get to people to help them through the change process. That's why I went for the master's in leadership.
Mhm.
Um, led to a writing of a book, and just me really trying to work as hard as I can, seemingly every day. It feels like there's very little time for a break, to try to just make the smallest difference I possibly can make in this field.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing. I love your story. I feel for you for all you've been through, but just to see where your path led you is so incredible. And
Thank
before
you.
we continue, actually, I just want to take a moment for everyone listening to celebrate you and this huge milestone you just hit. That's such an incredible accomplishment that's built through your strength and dedication and self-devotion to get to this place. And it's really something special. So just congratulations to you for your tenure.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels weird. It feels like the first one I feel very proud of. It's a double digit club, and I feel obviously the first year was very difficult, and we're very proud of every year, but at the same time, it just feels like, wow, it's hit a decade. It also means I'm getting old, and that explains why everything on me hurts all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, same.
Yeah.
No, just hearing your story though, and it will deeply inspire people, just, the hardship you've been through and where you are now. And I think, back when you started, like to even imagine everything you're doing now seems so just, like a dream.
Impossible.
Like, yeah. And I think even
Yeah.
in relation to people who are so deep in their grief right now, they can't see that far out. It feels like unrealistic, but you really can get to this place of being able to do whatever you want to accomplish in life. And I think you're such a great example of that. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
happy you're here.
Thank you. It definitely takes a lot of work and a lot of support from many, 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 many people.
For
And there's
sure.
no way we can do this process on our own. And it's the same with grief. It's the same with anything that we struggle with. We all need support.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're not meant to do it alone. That's for sure.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So when people do lose someone to addiction, I feel like there's just so many unanswered questions, so many things that we don't understand. So I think it will be very healing for people in this group who have lost someone to hear your perspective, having gone through what you have, being on the other side of this. And yeah, like you were saying, I think they feel like they should have known better, or they were smarter than that, or they were raised better than that. They have these feelings and just wonder why, like knowing the extreme consequences that can come from these decisions, like why they would choose to do that. Can you just talk a little more? I know you did a little bit, but about just the bigger picture issue of addiction and kind of like, I know it stems from trauma a lot of times and different past experiences, but like, how did you use these substances to cope and to mask certain things that you were feeling?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's such a complicated answer. So I'm going to try to sum it up the best that I can, because addiction is something that is developed uh, through so many different pathways, and
Yeah.
it's sort of we've obviously transitioned as a community from the belief that it was a choice that somebody made to keep to continually use to hurt their loved ones, to make all the decisions and behaviors that go around using um, and to destroy their lives. And we've fortunately moved over to understanding that it's a disease now that
Mhm.
is usually some form of coping with some type of underlying disorder issue, some type of pain that's under there. And I think it's such a complicated question to answer. Um, I think for me, I guess I can talk. Maybe that'll be better. Um, for me, I think what it was that I never really felt heard growing up. And I felt like that I didn't ever really I formed my own identity and who I was. And I somehow over growing up decided to become like a form of a chameleon where whomever I was talking to, I would just kind of transform into that person and try to meet them so they would like me.
Yeah.
And my conversations were very rarely authentic with anybody. And it was like I had an entire shelf of different masks that I was constantly grabbing and putting on and shifting really to hide who I really was because I didn't like myself.
Yeah.
And I think the issue with addiction, though, is that it's a perpetual cycle, that the more I'm using these behaviors of hiding myself and being inauthentic, the more I'm disconnecting myself from other people. And then the more I'm also committing shameful acts to support my addiction. So it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And the dislike that we have for ourselves just grows over time. So that's why it is so hard to overcome an addiction, regardless of treatment attempts, regardless of family pleading, regardless of any boundaries that are set. Sometimes it can just be so hard to face all of the pain that we have inside. And it's just unfortunately easier to bury ourselves in substances and numb ourselves.
Yeah.
So I know that sort of answers the question, but I think the bigger picture of it is like we all wonder is like why didn't they stop, and did I do enough? Is the big question that we get from families a
Yeah.
lot. And the hard truth is there is no definitive answer to why didn't they stop. And it doesn't mean that they didn't love you. It doesn't mean that they didn't care about you. The best way that I look at addiction is that, we have this incredible brain that controls everything that we're doing. And the number one piece of our brain is survival, right? So it knows that we need to eat, sleep, procreate, breathe. And
Hmm.
at some point, the reward circuitry is interrupted and a priority is put so that those neurotransmitters can be released naturally or artificially. Those are replaced by the need for those substances that are releasing massive amounts of these neurotransmitters. So eventually, what happens is your brain believes that you need these substances to survive. So that's why there's so many people with addiction issues who can wake up in the morning and go like, what the hell did I do yesterday? I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. Today's the day. And 2 hours later, be back doing the same behavior again,
Yeah.
because it's just so overwhelming. And that doesn't turn into like a physical issue where you're choking and you need to breathe. It more turns into all of these thoughts that are basically convincing you that you must go get these substances. You start rationalizing, you start convincing yourself of why it's not time to stop, that tomorrow might be better, and it just keeps the cycle going. And that's why it's so difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, from my perspective, being a partner to someone who was struggling with that, like it was just so hard to watch. I could see that he felt so much shame and the things he was doing and what he was using. It's like no person goes into a situation like that wanting to become an addict. Like every person is so individual, the way our bodies are, physiologically, like some people can do the same things and not become addicted in the same ways as others, and it's
Yeah.
such an individual experience.
Can I like jump in for a quick,
Oh yeah.
would you be offended if I just gave like a quick teaching moment for a second?
No, I would love that.
Um, Not that I already haven't been. I've been talking about neurotransmitters and God knows what. Um, so the term addict, actually, what we're working really hard for in the industry is to actually stop using terms like addict.
Mm,
In many ways, like we've stopped using other words to describe people who struggle with mental disabilities. We're trying to move it more towards a medical clinical model. So
mm,
we've stopped using the term addict because it's harder to admit that I'm an addict, and it's easier to admit that I suffer. I'm a person who suffers with a substance use disorder or
yeah.
suffers with an addiction issue. It's easier to say that and recognize that that's just one part of me as opposed to being defined as something like an addict.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? So it's like
No,
if you're
I love that because even in typing out, kind of my notes for the questions, like I didn't want to, I felt like weird typing them. Like I don't want to, people say it all the time, but it felt wrong
yeah,
to me just even including that. So I
it's
love that.
yeah. And just by the way, it's not offensive to me at all. And
Yeah.
it's just
Okay,
something that we're trying to shift and towards to help improve some of the stigma and increase access to care is shifting some of the words that we used. We
good. Yeah.
wouldn't call
I
someone who has
appreciate that.
depression a depressed. We would
Yeah.
they struggle with depression. It's the same concept.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So over the course of your recovery, what are some of the healthy coping mechanisms you've learned to develop over this time? Because I know, using drugs like is a way to cope. So what do you do now that you're sober?
Yeah, it's funny to think back on using substances to cope. Now that you kind of look back on it, I'm like, well, that didn't make much sense. Like that was a dumb attempt because it really just depletes us, if anything, or just kind of like it just it makes the pain just have to wait a little bit, until it comes back, and then you got to keep using. So some of the coping mechanisms, one I think started off with treatment for me.
Mhm.
I think I needed a true overhaul, and I needed people to be honest with me. I needed to be held accountable. I needed somebody to tell me that I was a chameleon. even though I knew it, there was no way in hell that I was going to admit it, that I was being fake with everyone. So accountability and having a support group and having people that I can rely on to shoot it to me straight, no matter what, has
Mm.
been one of the most imperative parts of my sobriety since
Yeah.
day one. Um, at the same time, I like to look at it like as a three-pronged disease, as do most people. It's mental, physical, and spiritual.
Mm.
So continued therapy on and off throughout my sobriety has been very helpful, looking back on certain behaviors that I've developed, and why they've developed that way, and then how to move away from them. Learning to become confident, learning to form my own identity through the therapy process has been very helpful.
Yeah.
Uh, Physically, for me, exercise or some form of movement has provided me a lot of relief, um, and a lot of confidence as well, to be honest. And then there's the spiritual side, which is something I go back and forth on. I didn't grow up in a household that was like a big God household.
Mhm.
Um, in fact, I was told I had to have a bar mitzvah, but I was also told that it's all BS at the same time, and that it's sort of like, I just don't want to say God's not real because that I might get struck by lightning. So, but you're going to do your bar mitzvah, and then you could stop from there. So, like, it
Yeah.
was never really a discussion in our house. So
Nothing you could
I've
really
learned to
object to.
right.
Yeah.
What I have learned though, and I think anybody can learn from this, is that praying is not about who or what you're praying to, and there's actual science behind prayer, but praying is about putting your energy out into the universe, into the world,
Mhm.
and basically giving words to what it is you're struggling with and where it is you're looking to go with those struggles and what you're looking to do with them. And also, prayer is a great opportunity for gratitude. And so for me, one of the things I think I've done since day one is, every night just before bed, it's just a quick thank you for another day. And I kind of just say it out loud quickly right before I fall asleep.
Mhm.
But it's, to me, that's a little prayer. And then meditation, which has also come and gone in my life, but it's been pretty consistent recently. Meditation has been one of the most calming and grounding things I've experienced. Of, who knew that if you give 10 minutes a day to just focusing on your breath, it could be so
Yeah.
healing.
And you can start so small too. I think
Yeah,
people get overwhelmed like by people who sit for 35 minutes, an hour, they're like,
yeah.
that's too much. I can't sit still for that long. But it's so great to be able to start with these quick meditations, and it's so powerful.
There's an app called Breathwork that got me started on this. That was
Okay.
like, it was like 2 minutes of just some types. It guides you what type of breath he wants you to do.
Hmm.
And it just opened me up to the world of meditation because I felt so much better just after 2 minutes of a certain type of breathing, that it opened me up to maybe moving towards 5 minutes, then 10 minutes. And I'm just kind of hovering around 10 now because it's given me what I need.
Hmm. I think going
So,
from that cycle of chaos and, constant moving to that feeling of just feeling centered and grounded, it's like such a big difference.
mhm.
Something that people like, when you feel it, you're like, I need more of that.
Yeah. And you feel as it fades too when you stop doing it. You
Yes.
feel, if you skip for 2, 3 days, you're like, why am I still on edge today? And you
Hmm.
realize, like, I need to take 10 minutes and do this. I do want to point out one thing, and I think it's important to note that, I hope people realize, like, I didn't mention family in my support for my recovery.
Hmm.
Now, there are some families where there's some enmeshment there that's positive, and family can be very supportive of the recovery, but the recovery was my job. The relationships I have with my family and my wife, which is like, my wife is the greatest support I have for life,
Oh,
but for my
good.
recovery, that's my job. And that's my job to seek, and that's my job to take actions for. So I can't rely on my family for that because it adds too much stress to their life. All I know is that while I'm doing well in my recovery, my relationships with my family improve, but it's
Yeah.
not part of my recovery system.
I think for so long in my experience with Greg and, with other people we knew who were struggling, it's kind of like, why aren't they accepting our help? Like, why can't they see that what I'm trying to do for them is good for them, is going to help them? And we try to step in
Right.
and even control the situation a little bit, I think, because we feel like we know better. And it's truly coming from a place of love and concern, but it
Of
puts this
course.
added pressure on everyone involved. And then I think it makes it even more complicated
It
for
adds
everyone.
tension and stress to the mix, and
So
everybody
much.
starts getting burnt out. And I was
Yeah.
just talking to a family yesterday about this exact topic of kind of asking them, like, hey, when are you going to loosen up on the reins a little bit? It's sort of like you formed an inpatient treatment center in your own house, and you're watching this person's every move. Like, that's got to be exhausting.
Yeah.
And it's not the family's job to do that. Eventually, the person has to have some ownership. And sometimes you have to. And in this situation, they have to. But eventually, we have to let go of control
Mhm.
and hope the person's going to do what they can and be there for them if they fall. But we cannot control another person's actions, no matter how hard we try.
It took me years to figure that out. It took
Yeah.
a long time, but it really does have to come from within. You can't, that's such a big life change for someone to go through. It's like you can't make that decision for them.
And even when you do realize that, and if something happens to the person, which you know much better than me, but if even if you do have that realization that you can't control, and then something happens, it doesn't really matter. You're going to feel the guilt and you're going to have regrets and you're going to have thoughts of what ifs no matter what.
Mm.
And it's just knowing that sometimes the more we control, the worse things get, the more out of control things get.
Yeah.
And so knowing that if by holding our own boundaries is actually helping our loved one, and that no matter what we've done, we've tried the best that we possibly could.
One of the hardest things about loving someone who struggles is setting boundaries and, for our own well-being. And for me, it was like so hard to choose myself in that situation because I was giving everything and gave all of myself, and it
Man.
I destroyed myself in the process. And then when I realized, okay, I need boundaries around this and I have to stick with them for my own well-being, which is also very hard. If they do pass, there's such a heavy weight that comes with that, just feeling like, okay, you set these boundaries. I could only like be around him in certain situations at times, or could only speak to him like at certain times. And, when someone does pass, it's that guilt and feeling like you could have done more or said more. It's just a horrible feeling
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Truly. And then again, I think I've been there mostly with clients and some friends, but it's, losing a direct loved one in that way. I can only imagine the mental process and anguish that you go through.
Yeah, you may have spoken on it already, but can you just, I think it would bring comfort for people for you to just talk again how necessary it actually was, like for you, for people to set like strict boundaries with you. I think it's necessary for both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like my boundaries came later down the road once I started thinking healthier.
Yeah.
But for my family, they basically did exactly what I would suggest now as a professional. So someone must have been in their ear, but they essentially, and 10 years ago, by the way, it was a little bit harsher than recommendations that are made today. People are a little bit more sensitive for good reason.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a bit more harsh back then, but they essentially provided me with help. They did an intervention, got me to a safe place, and then told me, "Good luck. To protect our family, we are done with you. Goodbye. Good luck finding your way home.
Yeah.
You need to do what you need to do. Goodbye." And they stuck to it, man. And I don't know how they did. They stuck to it, and the realization after them sticking to it was like, "Whoa, I'm affecting more people than myself." And that's what the impact, the boundaries that they set had on me was like, whoa, this whole time I thought I was just hurting myself. I had no clue that I was affecting this many people
Mm.
legitimately. And I want to stop this. Like, I don't mean to hurt everyone else. I'm done. And I'll do whatever it takes to stop. And it was a painful, long process, but I decided to step back. And then their boundaries were very clear moving forward in terms of when you come home, these are the expectations. This is what's happening. This is your last shot.
Mhm.
And they were very clear about it and were a little hard on me. Never were afraid to question me. flat out,
Yeah.
not necessarily in an aggressive way, but we're never afraid to say, hey, I see how you look right now. I don't know if you're tired or you used something. Can you tell me? And it was such a healthy way for me to be like, thank you for asking like that. No, I just worked like a 12-hour shift. I'm just tired. So I always say that it took me 3 years. I think people know with 12 steps, there's the amends is the number 9. And it took me 3 years to make an amends to my mom because
Wow.
I wanted to show her that I was serious, but I also knew she wouldn't believe me that I really tried changing and that I'm serious about this process
Mm.
until that time. And it was like Thanksgiving right before my 3rd year. And I felt finally confident and enough that she could see that I was taking this seriously to make my amends there with her. But that boundary with her was strong. Like, I'm not going to let you in. I don't feel safe with you around. My purse is going to be in my lap at all times. She made it clear. And those are the types of reminders that I needed to keep going and keep changing.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to set those because there always is that risk of something happening and not having the relationship that you hope that you could have, through that
Yeah.
loss. But it's like not having those boundaries destroys everyone else's well-being, and you still don't have that relationship that you're hoping for yet. So yeah, it really is
Yeah.
just necessary. I just want people to, kind of understand that.
Without the boundaries in place, it becomes the person who is loving the person who's struggling starts mimicking almost the same behaviors as the person who's struggling. They start becoming sneaky, they start lying, they start manipulating, they start trying to figure out ways to control every situation.
Yeah.
They become a person they don't like. So the boundaries are almost a safety net that's put there to protect the person from falling too deep of becoming addicted to their loved one's success or failures.
Oh my gosh, I've
And
never heard anyone explain it like that. It's so true.
yeah, no, thank you. And the boundaries are really intended to protect the loved one,
Yeah.
protect yourself. That's why boundaries are put in place is I need to set certain boundaries to protect me. And then just sort of a beautiful ancillary product that can come as a result of those boundaries is the person starts changing. Once somebody in the family changes the dynamic that's been going on for so many years, a
Mhm.
shift occurs. And it may not happen right away. It could happen 2 years down the road, 3 years, 5 years, or it may never happen, unfortunately. But usually, once someone shifts that dynamic, changes begin to occur.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the way you explained all that. I think too, one of the hardest and saddest things about my relationship with Greg specifically, and then ultimately losing him, was that I feel like his addiction completely stole him from me slowly over time, like leading up to his death. And
Mm.
I just, it was such a hard situation to navigate. And it was never that I needed him to be different. I just wanted him back. I so badly wanted Greg as himself because he was so amazing.
Mm.
And watching and experiencing that as his partner was like just devastating in itself. And I'm wondering, like, from your perspective through your addiction, did you notice like a loss of self while you were using, or what was your experience of that leg? Like, did you experience that at all? Or did
Yeah.
you?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I think like I can't tell you the number of times I heard just I wish the old Blake back. Like my dad would say I want Blakey back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't even know at the time though what that meant. And it's like it's only in retrospect that I see what they were talking about. But yes, I mean, I am not a person who is going to lie to somebody. It's really difficult for me to do it.
Mhm.
I'm not somebody who's going to manipulate. I'm not somebody who's going to break the law, even. I like to think of myself as somebody who wants to help others. And instead, it looked like I became someone who was just taking advantage of others.
Mm.
And that's not me. I couldn't believe how far it took me um, to be able to support this habit. And there wasn't it's like almost like you're on autopilot almost when all of these things are going on. It's like you're on autopilot and it goes back to that survival mechanism I talked about earlier, where it's like
Mhm.
I think my body thought it needed this to survive. So it was a do whatever it takes type of tactic. And it was only after the drugs had just gotten into the opiates just got into my system where I would start being like, what did I just do? Like, why did I do this again? As soon as I felt better, I
Yeah.
like, why did I just do that? How did I just screw this up again? This
Yeah.
is so terrible. And then that just makes me want to keep using as the substance wears off and you're thinking clearly for a little bit. It's like, what? You just want that feeling to go away.
Yeah. I know I had so many of those conversations with him and just watched him go through that cycle, many times.
Yeah.
So I want to just talk about the topic of forgiveness because I spent years working towards forgiveness, towards Greg, towards myself, and just towards our relationship as a whole. How important do you feel forgiveness is in this situation from people on both sides?
Forgiveness in terms of, I guess I think of forgiveness as something we do for ourselves.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and I think forgiveness is something that by forgiving somebody else, we're letting go of the grip that they have on us, and
Mm,
that the event or multiple events, the effects it had on us. So I think of forgiveness in that sense. So if we are thinking it from a lens of it is something that we do for ourselves and not for the other person, then it's impossible to say it's not extraordinarily important,
yeah.
right? Because it's a sense of relief and letting go of the pain that we were holding on to. It doesn't mean we forget and we learn from each incident that
Right.
occurs, but I think for us to be able to forgive and let go and to truly forgive, that's kind of like the hard part sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, I think that is the most important thing we can do for ourselves.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know,
The only way
seeing
I
it.
could move forward was to just like release that anger and resentment and any other negative feeling that came up as a result from, the situations that we had both been put in, the trauma that we went through together. And
Can I, can I interview you for a second?
sure.
Um, how did you get there? What led you to be able to let go of that, and how did you do that work? And what does that look like for you?
It started with shifting my focus from him to myself
Okay.
and finding my own self-worth again and
Okay.
just realizing that I deserve more. I deserve to give myself more. I deserve to not carry around this anger and these like feelings that are just feel so heavy. Like I didn't
Mm,
want my life to be like that. So starting with myself and my connection to my own spirituality, my own body, my relationship to life, just in general. And,
yeah.
finding habits that supported that and that made me feel good and just then intentionally living life from that place and finding, I think eventually, it's not doesn't just happen like that. It took years for me to work through like
Okay.
different stages of our relationship and his addiction, but
Did
ultimately
you
like
were you able to forgive him prior to his passing, or was it something that you've continued to work on afterwards?
I reached that point well before he passed. Yeah.
Okay.
Thankfully. I'm thankful for that I
Yeah.
got there. Yeah.
You made such an important point. I keep like stuttering today. You made such an important point. That's a hard one to say. Um, that it is a process and it's not something that we just say, I forgive you and it's over. It's a process of understanding and even empathy, of us
Mhm.
putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and trying to see it from their perspective and understand what happened behind the scenes, behind their eyes, what was motivating their decisions, and understanding the
Yeah.
bigger picture. But that's such a powerful thing that you said, that it takes a while to get to that point, and recognizing that it's holding a grip on us probably more than the event is holding on them sometimes.
Yeah. And, all these feelings I was experiencing, like they were never stronger than my love for him. And I was always, all of my actions were like from a place of really, truly loving him. But I just couldn't continue living a life with all these horrible feelings and emotions, just like and being trapped in that. So it was kind of just
Hmm.
making that decision, like it's either this or that, like what's happening around me. Like I don't think I realized that until I figured out that this is out of my control. This is his life and his decisions.
Yeah.
That was probably the first like big shift I needed to make.
Was there any type of symbolic event that you did to kind of finally let it all go and release it? Like, 'cause I know some people will write it on paper and burn it, or like there's events like that.
I think for me, it just happened like slowly over
Okay.
time. Yeah. I, I saved him from overdosing multiple times, and I think I just slowly like reached a point where I was like, I've done all I can do. Like there's nothing else I can do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about trauma. That's a lot to see and deal
Yeah.
with, especially with somebody you love.
Yeah. Hardest thing I've ever been through.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And everybody, I guess.
I'm glad you
I
asked.
forgot that this is
Yeah.
an interview.
Yeah. No, I'm actually so glad you asked. Yeah. That was great. Um, the last thing I really want to touch on is, this whole series is on the topic of grief, and with that, like it's heavy and hard and so complicated, and it can bring people to such a dark place, and it, like you said, it's so easy to choose to numb that out. And I just want everyone watching to know who is struggling with using or drinking, that there is a better way. So if you could get this group of people into a room with you, like what would you say to them? What advice would you give to help them get through this?
Yeah, that's I can't imagine a greater pain or a better reason to use substances than and to numb than grief and losing somebody we love. I could not imagine something more painful.
Mm,
Um, what I do know from witnessing it with my own eyes is watching other people who are in recovery who don't have the option of using substances anymore, or they've removed the option for themselves. I've watched them go through losing children, losing loved ones, and I've watched them talk about it with their supports. I've watched them show up to therapy. I've watched them trudge that road for as long as it took to just slowly start feeling better, no matter how long it took, without numbing themselves. And watched them go through that pain and feel every ache and every emotion that came up. And I think that that was the healthiest way for them to
yeah.
process it. The more we push off that pain using substances, that pain is just going to be waiting for you on the other side of it. And the more that we can process through and work through it and have support and receive therapy and try to make sense and a purpose out of the experiences we have in our life, I think the easier it will be for us to overcome it down the road. The other thing that I guess I would say, um, I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want to sound insensitive in any way, but it's not intended. And I hope that with everything I've said, I hope people have sort of gotten to know me well enough at this point to know that like this is coming from a great place. Um, I don't no loss that anybody, especially to addiction, has experienced is in vain. And it's the stories of losing people that keep so many of us going for another day.
Mhm.
And I don't mean to say that they have to keep passing in order for us to succeed, but I can tell you that the passing of people's loved ones and seeing that pain and understanding what that's like and losing our brothers and sisters to this disease, it does keep us going and it helps inspire us in our own recovery journeys without a doubt 100%.
Yeah.
And it provides us with a sense of gratitude for our days so that we know that we're so happy to be able to be here and we know how lucky we are because every single one of us could have succumbed to this disease. So we know how lucky we are to have breath in our lungs today and to be able to walk this path of recovery because of the
Mm.
people that have been lost all around us.
Yeah, it's so true. Greg and I used to, we lost a lot of friends along like through our time together, and he lost even more like prior to us meeting. And he kept a list of them all. We used to read it every once in a while and just honor them. And leading
Yeah.
up to when he passed, it was like 60 people on that list of people he knew. So just the loss, like I look back at it now, I'm like, just the loss that he experienced in his life was just so great. It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's even like for ourselves, like we've all been so close to it at some point, those of
Mm.
us in recovery. And I think it's like knowing the hardest part for us, but it also keeps us motivated about it, is knowing that the pain that they were in right before it happened and the struggles that they were having and the guilt that they felt, knowing that we no longer have to experience that anymore is what keeps us going.
Yeah.
So I hope that's not insensitive. I don't mean it to sound like we're using people's loss. It's just, it
Oh,
really
I
does help
didn't take it that
motivate
way
us.
at
So,
all. Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, the biggest or one of the biggest things is just finding that support system that you feel safe in, that you resonate with, whether it's people that you actually connect with. Having the support and not going through this alone is like so huge. Like we're
100%.
not supposed to do
So
this
important.
without any of it. Life, anything.
No, for sure. And it is so hard to ask for help, and it is so hard to show up to
Yes.
support groups and do all these things. But I think anybody who's experienced it at any point knows, like, when you show up, it sucks to have to go, but by the time you're leaving or by the time the conversation you have ends when you ask for help, you feel so much better. So as
Mm.
hard as it is, and as much as you don't want to do it, it's exactly what we have to do.
But then just hearing, for the people watching, hearing your story and seeing what you've accomplished as a result of the support that you received is so inspiring.
Yeah.
I hope it invites people to reach out for help if they need it. I know it will actually.
Yeah. Well, I'm just another bozo on the bus, and there's a ton of us out there that are successful, and recovery is real. There is hope for people who are struggling. And there's millions and millions of people who have fortunately recovered from this disease. So I'm just another one of them trying to do our part.
Yeah. Well, I'm so proud of you. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. I do have two final
Thank you.
questions that I'm asking everyone. And the
Ooh, okay.
first is, what is the most beautiful life lesson you've learned through the process of your recovery? I'm sure you've touched on it already, but
I don't know if I did. That's a tough question. Um, the most beautiful life lesson. Does everybody struggle when you ask?
some people do. Yeah, it's a big question, but
It is a
all
big
the answers have
question.
been, I've loved all the answers.
I think the I think the best this year, the biggest blessing, right? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
go with that. That's
Yeah.
great.
What did you say?
I said beautiful life lesson, but I like
Beautiful
blessing.
life lesson.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the most beautiful life lesson that I've learned is that now it's like all easy to me. Now I totally understand what the question, and I know the answer to this. The most beautiful and the biggest life lesson that has paid dividends is that vulnerability and asking for help and being
Mm.
an open book is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. And finally being myself after 25 years almost of trying to be somebody else, and finally feeling comfortable enough to not be perfect all the time and to hurt and to have flaws and to wear that on my sleeve has led to the most beautiful, incredible conversations, relationships,
Yeah.
and passions, careers, everything in my life. So I would say that being vulnerable and being willing to look stupid or to look flawed, whatever it is, that has been the biggest blessing of my recovery.
Oh my gosh, great answer. Love it.
Sweet.
And if you could go back in time to some of your hardest moments, what would you say to yourself to keep going?
I'd probably smack myself in the back of the head first. And I don't think I'd say anything. I think I would just let it keep going. Honestly, I don't think I would change a moment of anything because every experience has taught me a lesson truly. And I think it led me to exactly where I am today. And I would be very cautious to change anything in my past because I don't want to change anything today.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I'm so happy
So
for where your path has led you. I'm so happy to
I'd
have
still
connected with you and brought you onto this event. This is such a
thank
powerful
you.
conversation and something that so many people need to hear. And I think for those watching who have lost someone to addiction, I think this conversation will bring a lot of peace and comfort. And that was my hope.
I
So
hope so.
yeah.
I definitely hope so. I have only an understanding through third party of what that's like to lose somebody directly
Mhm.
that you love. It's in your family. And I included in my book, the third story is about a mother who's lost their daughter. And what I thought was going to be the most impactful story ended up not being because people thought it was too far-fetched what this woman was going through.
Mm.
Thinking that her daughter's in the other room and running into the room just in case that she might be there and she wasn't actually passed away. And hearing every time a song comes on the radio, thinking that it was their daughter playing the song through them. But
Oh
all
my,
of those things were told to me through from people who've lost somebody they love. Those were their experiences. And I just kind of made a fictional story out of it, but those are the real experiences. And, um, I do know from knowing many people who've lost, it does get better. It just takes a while and it takes the work,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. I'm thankful for the place that I've gotten to now, being able to like put this event on and share my own story, which is obviously very vulnerable, and but I try to be open, like you said, like an open book, and it gives people the chance to just find someone they resonate with and really, really connect to something and connect to stories of people who are doing great things now, despite all
Yeah.
that
And
they've been through.
I probably am not the only one to do this, but I kind of want to also take a minute to celebrate you and to celebrate
Oh my
this
gosh,
event.
thanks.
So everybody who's watching virtually, I hope you can hit the little clap thing or whatever, however you're watching this, clap, cheer. This is not an easy thing to put together. I know you must be working your butt off, and this is such an important event and topic to discuss. So props to you for this. This is awesome. And I'm
Oh, thank
so
you so
grateful to be
much.
here and have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been so wonderful. Before we go, tell everyone, where we can find you, what's going on in your world. How can people connect with you?
So you can go on Amazon if you are interested in reading my book. It's a very short, easy read. It's meant to be that way. It's actually meant to facilitate conversation. So it's a very easy read. Uh, it's I Love You More, short stories of addiction, recovery, and loss from the family's perspective. If you just type in I Love You More Addiction, it'll come up on Amazon. And also go to Next Level Recovery associates.com or nextlevelra.com to find out more about our organization, how we're helping. And the last piece is if you are interested in supporting NAMI of Broward County, which is where I live. NAMI is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. We are constantly looking to raise funds for NAMI. We are very active members of the board. And if anybody's interested, please go to NAMI Broward. Just Google NAMI Broward, and if you can donate anything you can, it'd be amazing.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you shared. Thank you so much,
Thank
Blake.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you.